Feudalism is a term invented in the 19th century to describe how society was structured during the High Middle Ages. That's between 1000 and 1300 AD. The feudal system was based on the exchange of land and services. Under the feudal system, all the land in the kingdom belonged to the king. He would then parcel out large estates to great lords known as tenants-in-chief in exchange for their military and political support. These great lords then parcelled out smaller portions of the land to lesser lords on similar terms, who did the same to local lords, who did the same to peasants. The feudal system had its own vocabulary. A king or lord who gave land to a lesser lord became the latter's overlord. The person receiving the land became the vassal of the person who granted it, and the land itself was called a fief. A vassal was not necessarily a minor figure. Everyone in the feudal system below the king was a vassal, even the greatest lords in the land. Even the King of England was a vassal to the King of France for the lands he had inherited there. By the later Middle Ages, though, feudalism had largely disappeared from Europe. This was the result of a number of factors. Firstly, medieval kings grew less reliant on their great lords to provide soldiers for their armies, turning instead to professional paid soldiers. This weakened the bonds of feudalism built on the obligation to provide military service. Secondly, the Black Death, which arrived in England in 1348, significantly reduced the population available to work the land. Those who were lucky enough to survive the epidemic had increased bargaining power and could increasingly choose where they worked and demand higher wages. This meant that the nobility gradually lost their control over the lower and middling ranks in society, who could now afford to buy their own land. Finally, increasing urbanization and a greater reliance on a money economy rather than a land economy also contributed to the decline of feudalism. So to recap, the great lords were no longer expected to provide military service to the king, the peasants were increasingly free to live and work where they wanted, and money replaced manpower as the key agent of economic and political power. Whilst feudalism declined in England from the 14th century onwards, it was not formally abolished until the 10 Years' Abolition Act of 1660. In other European countries, the end of feudalism came much later. France abolished feudalism after the 1789 revolution, and Russian peasants had to wait until 1861 to be made free. Amazingly, the last remaining traces of feudalism in the British Isles made it into the 21st century, until finally abolished by the Scottish Parliament in June 2000, with the Abolition of Feudal Tenure Act to take effect in November 2004.